Emily Bennett's world shatters when she discovers her husband Darren is having an affair. Struggling with the pain of betrayal, she decides to confront him, but the truth cuts deeper than she expected. As their marriage unravels, Emily finds herself caught between the life she thought she had and the woman she's becoming. With emotions running high and her future uncertain, Emily must navigate heartbreak, trust, and her own self-discovery. Will she reclaim her life, or will the weight of the past consume her? Stay tuned to see how Emily's story unfolds, because nothing is ever as simple as it seems. It was a cold night in late November when everything started to unravel for Emily Bennett. She stood at the window of her upscale New York apartment, looking out over the sparkling city below. The skyline was a mix of lights, some steady, some flickering. But Emily's mind wasn't on the lights. It wasn't on the view, or even the chilly breeze sneaking in through the open window. Her thoughts were with her husband, Darren, or, rather, her suspicions about Darren. You see, Emily had always trusted Darren. He was her college sweetheart, the man she had built her life with. From their modest beginnings to a home in the heart of Manhattan, they had everything. Or so she thought. It wasn't that things had changed overnight, but something had been off. Little things. Subtle shifts that Emily couldn't ignore. Darren was a successful architect, always traveling for work, handling high-profile projects for major clients. His schedule was packed, and while Emily supported his career, she'd begun to feel the strain of his absences. It wasn't just the late nights anymore. It was the unexplained phone calls, the times he'd forgotten to mention important details, or the times he seemed too distracted to really be present when they were together. Emily wasn't a paranoid person, but the signs had been accumulating, one by one, until she couldn't help but wonder. It had been 3 months since she first started noticing the changes. 3 months of asking herself if she was just being paranoid or if there was something more going on. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, but now they were telling her something she didn't want to hear. The worst part, she didn't know how to confront him. She didn't know how to ask, "Are you cheating on me?" Because the answer felt like something that might break her forever. The uncertainty was the worst part. The endless questions without answers. It was starting to eat away at her. Every time Darren stepped out, she found herself scanning his phone, checking his social media, looking for a clue, a slip-up. But all she ever found were dead ends. On this particular night, she had just finished preparing dinner, a meal she knew Darren would probably rush through, claiming he was too tired from work. That was the usual excuse. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just numb. Her heart had been sinking a little bit more every day, and tonight, it felt heavier than ever. Maybe it was the way he'd left the apartment earlier without so much as a kiss. Goodbye. Maybe it was the feeling that something was off when he called earlier and seemed distracted, almost as if he was lying about where he was going. Maybe it was the gut feeling she had that there was another woman. She had to know for sure. She couldn't live like this anymore. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. A text from Darren. "Sorry, running late. Big meeting, I'll be home around 10. The usual message. The kind of message that should have put her at ease, but instead, it made her stomach churn. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe him. But the small, nagging voice in her head kept getting louder. After staring at her phone for a few moments, Emily made up her mind. She needed answers. She was done being in the dark. She couldn't wait until he came home, and she wasn't about to let him get away with another excuse. If there was something going on, she'd find out tonight. She waited until 8:30 p.m. before she stood up, grabbed her coat, and left the apartment. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to clear her mind. Walking through the streets of New York, the night air felt sharper than usual, biting at her cheeks. The city was bustling around her, people in and out of shops, lights shining from every corner, yet she felt completely alone. All she could think about was Darren. The streets became quieter as she walked, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure where her feet were taking her, but after about 10 minutes, she found herself in front of a familiar cafe. It was a spot they used to visit often when they were first dating. They'd had their first kiss in the corner booth. The memory brought a bitter smile to Emily's lips. She hadn't been here in ages. When was the last time Darren even suggested going out for coffee? Too long, it seemed. Everything seemed to have changed in their relationship. Maybe it wasn't just Darren. Maybe it was her too. But that didn't explain why she felt like she was living in someone else's life. A shadow moved across the street, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. She looked up to see Darren's car pull up in front of a building across the street. It was the kind of building you'd expect a meeting to happen in. Tall, sleek, and business-oriented. But it wasn't where Darren usually went. It was unfamiliar to her. She quickly ducked into the shadows, not wanting to be seen. Her eyes were glued to the street, her heart pounding in her chest. What was he doing here? Who was he meeting? The more she watched, the more suspicious she became. She saw Darren step out of the car, but he wasn't alone. A woman stepped out of the building, her face partially hidden by a scarf. Emily's breath hitched. Something about the way Darren greeted her, the smile, the way he touched her arm, sent a cold shiver down Emily's spine. This wasn't just a colleague, this wasn't just a business meeting. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. She had her answer. The worst kind of answer. For a few moments, Emily stood frozen, watching Darren and the woman laugh as they walked into the building together. The door closed behind them, and Emily felt her knees weaken. It was all true. It was worse than she had ever imagined. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not now. Emily stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to process what she had just seen. This was the man she loved, the man she trusted with everything. And now, here he was, betraying her in ways she never imagined. The weight of it all crushed down on her, and suddenly, she felt small, like a stranger in her own life. She couldn't go back to the apartment, not now. She needed to think, to figure out what to do next. The world seemed to blur around her, and all she could do was walk. As she strolled through the city streets, Emily's mind raced. She could confront Darren, but what would that accomplish? Would he lie? Would he deny it? The thought of facing him in person, hearing him try to justify his actions, made her sick to her stomach. No. She needed a plan A way to show him the truth. He wouldn't get away with this. Not without facing the consequences. Her thoughts circled around the idea of revenge, of making him feel what she felt. The way she felt now, betrayed, humiliated, furious. In that moment, Emily realized something that terrified her. The woman she thought she was, calm, rational, trusting, was gone, and in her place stood a woman determined to make Darren pay. She pulled out her phone and texted her best friend, Mia. "I need you. I found out the truth. I need help." As her phone buzzed with a quick response, Emily's heart raced. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she wouldn't just be the victim anymore. It was time to take control, to reclaim what was hers. Emily sat in the small cafe, her phone clenched tightly in her hand as she stared at the screen. The text she had sent to Mia earlier had already been read, but there was no reply yet. She knew Mia would be there for her. She always had been. Still, the waiting felt unbearable. Her mind was racing, replaying the images of Darren and the woman from earlier over and over. Every time she thought of Darren's smile, the touch on her arm, the familiarity between them, it made her blood boil. The betrayal was fresh, raw, and unforgiving. She tried to steady her thoughts, to calm the turmoil in her mind, but everything felt like it was spinning out of control. How long had it been going on? Was this the first time, or had there been others Emily had to know? She couldn't let Darren slip away without facing the consequences of his actions. But what could she do now? Confronting him seemed too easy. Emily was never one to back down, but she also wasn't the type to make hasty decisions. No. She would plan her next move carefully. She needed to see Darren's reaction, to watch him squirm, to make him realize just how deeply he had hurt her. Her phone buzzed, and Emily jumped, pulling it into her hands to find Mia's name flashing on the screen. "Mia. I'm coming over. I want to hear everything. Don't do anything yet, just hold on." The words were a relief, and yet they made her feel even more alone in her situation. Mia had always been the impulsive one, the friend who acted before thinking, while Emily had always been the one to hold back, to think things through. But this time, she felt a fire inside her that she hadn't felt in years. She wanted to do something about this. She couldn't let Darren think he'd get away with it. As she sat there, her thoughts wandering, She started to feel like a stranger in her own life. Was she really considering revenge? Was this the person she had become? Part of her wanted to just pack her bags and leave, get away from it all, start fresh. But another part of her wanted Darren to feel everything she was feeling. She wanted him to understand the depth of his betrayal. She wanted him to regret every moment he spent with that woman, every lie he told, every second he spent thinking he could deceive her without consequence. As Emily's mind spun, the cafe door opened, and Mia walked in. She was a whirlwind of energy, as always, with her bright red hair and her casual confidence. Mia's eyes immediately scanned the room, landing on Emily, and she made her way over quickly, sitting down across from her. "You okay?" Mia asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. Emily nodded, though it felt like she was lying to herself. "I don't know what to think anymore." Mia leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed over her chest. "Well, first things first, we need to get all the facts straight. I don't want you doing anything crazy." Emily shot her a look. "Crazy? You think I'm going to do something rash?" Mia raised an eyebrow. "You're sitting in a cafe, staring at your phone like it's going to give you answers. I'm just saying, take a breath before you make any big decisions." Emily exhaled sharply, trying to calm herself. "I don't know, Mia. I can't stop thinking about it. The way he looked at her, the way he smiled, like I didn't even exist." Her voice faltered for a second, but she quickly regained control. "I want him to feel it. I want him to know what he's done to me." Mia softened, reaching across the table to take Emily's hand. "I get it. But you need to think about what you want, not just what you think he deserves, because you're not just going to hurt him, you're going to hurt yourself too." Emily's gaze dropped to their joined hands. She appreciated Mia's concern, but it felt like there was more at stake now than just her emotions. "I don't know if I can let this go, Mia. I've invested so much of myself into this relationship, and now it feels like it was all a lie." Mia sighed. "Okay, but here's the deal. You can't control what Darren does, but you can control how you react to it. Revenge might feel good for a minute, but in the end, it's just going to make you feel worse. Trust me on this." Emily looked up at Mia, her mind swirling. She knew her friend was right. Revenge never really solved anything. But in this case, it felt like it was the only thing that might give her the closure she needed. "I don't know what to do." "Just give it time," Mia said. "Let things unfold a little. You don't have to decide anything today." The conversation drifted after that, the weight of Emily's thoughts still heavy. She wasn't sure if she could follow Mia's advice, but for now, it was the only thing she could hold on to. She needed more information. She needed to know if Darren was truly the man she thought he was, or if he had become someone else entirely. Over the next few days, Emily decided to take a step back. She tried to regain some control over her life, focusing on work, spending time with friends, and avoiding Darren as much as possible. The house felt empty when he wasn't around, and when he was, it felt tense. He tried his best to act normal, but Emily could tell something was off. She wasn't sure if it was guilt, or if he was just pretending everything was fine. But either way, the distance between them only grew. Then, on a particularly quiet Wednesday evening, Emily received an unexpected phone call. It was from Darren's office. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm afraid your husband won't be able to make it home tonight," his secretary said. "He's been called into a late meeting with a client, and it's running longer than expected." Emily's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. "No problem, thank you for letting me know." She hung up the phone and stared at it for a moment, the truth hitting her harder than ever. Darren was lying. He wasn't working late, he was with her. The woman who had taken her place. The rage built inside her, but she didn't act on it. Not yet. Instead, she grabbed her coat and headed out to the apartment's back exit, leaving quietly. She knew Darren was supposed to be working late, but she needed proof. She needed to see it with her own eyes. This wasn't just about feeling betrayed anymore. It was about confirming the truth, once and for all. Emily's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she headed for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She was getting closer now, closer to the answer she had been dreading. She wouldn't let Darren think she was clueless. Tonight, she was going to take control of the situation, no matter what it took. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And of course, subscribe to stay tuned for the next chapter. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. I appreciate your patience. However, generating a full 3,000-word section here in one response is quite a lot of text to manage. I'll break it down into smaller sections, continuing to develop the plot, heightening the tension, and maintaining the engaging style that you've requested. Emily's heart raced as she stepped out of the elevator into the cold, quiet night. The air was sharp against her skin as she walked toward the alleyway behind their apartment building. She kept her head down, trying to avoid being seen. Every step felt heavy, her mind buzzing with thoughts of Darren and the woman. She was about to confront her worst fear. She wasn't sure whether she'd find Darren, or if it would be someone else entirely. But she needed to know the truth. The doubt, the gnawing suspicion, was killing her. She couldn't keep playing this game of uncertainty. The more she waited, the more she saw the cracks forming in the life they'd built. Every day that passed, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier, but tonight, she would get answers. As Emily stepped out into the street, the city was buzzing with its usual evening energy. People walked by, laughing, talking, and living their lives, while Emily's world felt like it was on the verge of collapse. She had to act quickly before Darren had the chance to cover his tracks again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, expecting it to be Mia checking in, but it was a message from Darren. "Hey, I'll be home soon, running late again. Sorry about this." A sharp pang of anger hit Emily's chest. He was lying again, pretending like everything was normal. It was all too much. She was done waiting. She needed to know for sure. No more guessing. No more pretending. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. Emily didn't respond to Darren's message. Instead, she tapped her phone and opened the map. She knew exactly where Darren was supposed to be. She'd tracked his movements before, using the tracking app she'd set up months ago when her suspicions first began. She watched as his location appeared on the screen, indicating that he was just a few blocks away. Her instincts were sharp. Her heart pounded harder as she started walking toward the location that had become all too familiar in her mind over the past few days. The building where Darren had been meeting the woman. As she neared the entrance, she slowed down, keeping her distance. She wasn't sure how to approach this, how to confront him. What would she even say? The idea of confronting him, of facing this painful truth, made her stomach twist. But there was no turning back now. She had come this far, and she needed to know everything. As she walked past the building, her eyes flickered toward the entrance. That's when she saw them, Darren and the woman. The woman's face was partially hidden by a scarf, but the way she stood with Darren, close, too close, made everything Emily had feared feel real. Darren had his arm around the woman's waist as they walked into the building, laughing, completely oblivious to Emily's presence just a few feet away. In that moment, something inside Emily snapped. The hurt, the betrayal, everything she had been holding in came rushing to the surface. She didn't even think. She just acted. She turned on her heels and walked quickly back toward her apartment, her mind reeling. It wasn't just the fact that Darren was cheating, it was the way he was doing it. The secrecy, the lies, the complete disregard for her. It had all been building up to this. But now she knew for sure. The confrontation was coming. She wasn't going to wait any longer. When Emily returned to the apartment, she sat in the dark for a while, her mind whirling. She couldn't sit still. She felt like she might explode, but she also felt numb, like everything was happening in slow motion. The anger was sharp and hot, burning through her veins. She needed a plan. She couldn't just confront him blindly, she had to be strategic. But as she waited for Darren to come home, she realized something. He was still the man she loved, and despite everything, she didn't want to destroy him. She wanted to expose the truth, make him realize what he had done, but she didn't want to tear apart everything they had built without a clear path forward. She still had so many questions. Was Darren truly the man she thought he was? Or had this affair revealed a side of him she didn't know? When the door finally opened, Emily's pulse spiked. Darren walked in, his face immediately lighting up when he saw her. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. He dropped his briefcase on the floor, moving toward her as if nothing was wrong. But Emily wasn't going to pretend anymore. "No, Darren, I'm done with the excuses, I know what's been going on." Darren's face faltered for a split second, before the usual mask slipped back into place. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tight. Emily could feel the tension building between them, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken truths. "I know you've been seeing her. I know about the woman, Darren." There was a long pause. Darren didn't say anything at first. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't attempt to cover it up with more lies. Instead, he just stood there, frozen. I never wanted to hurt you," he finally said, his voice strained, the sincerity in his eyes almost convincing. Emily laughed bitterly, the sound filled with disbelief. "No, Darren. You didn't want to hurt me, but you did anyway. You've been lying to me for months. I've been sitting here, waiting for you to come home, while you're out there with her. How long did you think you could keep this up? How long did you think I wouldn't notice?" Darren stepped forward, reaching for her, but Emily pulled away. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "You don't get to touch me after everything you've done." His eyes darted to the floor, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Em. It just did. You're not even sorry," Emily interrupted, her voice cracking with the weight of the pain she was feeling. "You're not even sorry for what you've done. You're just sorry that I found out." Darren's face twisted, a mix of frustration and regret clouding his expression. "I didn't want to hurt you. You know that? But things got complicated. Complicated?" Emily's voice was sharp, her heart pounding in her chest. "You think cheating on your wife is complicated? No, Darren. It's simple. You chose her over me. You lied to me over and over again. And for what? For what, Darren?" There was a long silence between them, the tension growing more unbearable with each passing second. Finally, Darren spoke again, his voice low and almost apologetic. "I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end this way, Em. We can fix this, we can work through it." Emily's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can believe you anymore," she whispered. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The words hit Darren hard. He looked at her with desperation in his eyes, but Emily had already made up her mind. She didn't need his promises anymore. She had seen everything she needed to see, but as she stood there, facing the man who had broken her heart, she realized one thing. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming her life, and if Darren couldn't be the man he once was, then Emily had to let him go. It was time to make a decision. As Emily stepped back from Darren, her heart hammered in her chest, each beat loud in her ears. She could see the helplessness in his eyes, the desperation, but there was something else there too. A flicker of guilt, maybe even regret, but it was too little, too late. He stood there, running a hand through his hair, his breath shaky. "Em, please. You have to believe me. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. We were—" "No." Emily cut him off, shaking her head firmly. "Don't try to explain. I'm done listening to your lies." There was a tense silence between them, the weight of their years together crashing down on her. What had they built? Was it all just an illusion? All those moments, all those good times, they suddenly felt hollow, tainted by the truth she had uncovered. How many times had Darren said he was working late? How many nights had she stayed up, waiting for him to come home, never suspecting that all along, he was with someone else? She wasn't angry anymore, not in the way she had been moments before. Now, she was just numb. The pain was still there. Yes, but something had shifted inside her. She had to let him go. She had to move forward, and that meant cutting ties with the man she thought she knew. Darren seemed to realize finally that no amount of pleading was going to change things. He took a step back, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the moment had finally settled in. "Em, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I can't lose you, I can't." For a moment, Emily felt the pull, the ache in her chest. She wanted to believe him, to fall into his arms and pretend that things could go back to the way they were, but she couldn't. She had seen too much, she had learned too much. This was who Darren had become, and this was not the man she could stand beside anymore. "Then it's over," Emily said, her voice steady, even though her hands were trembling. She turned toward the door, the finality of the words hitting her like a wave. "You need to leave. I need space." Darren didn't move at first, his gaze fixed on her. For a split second, Emily thought he might argue, might try to convince her once more that it could all be fixed. But instead, he just nodded. "I'll go. But Emily, I still love you." The words hung in the air, an echo of what they once had. But it was nothing more than a whisper now. The love they had was gone, replaced by the bitter reality of betrayal. Emily didn't say anything else. She couldn't. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was alone. The apartment was eerily quiet. She stood there for a moment, just breathing, taking in the stillness. It felt almost surreal. How had it come to this? How had they gone from building a life together to this? Broken. Shattered. But there was something else now. A sense of clarity. It had been building up inside her for days, but now it was undeniable. She was free. Free from the lies, free from the pain of not knowing, free from the suffocating weight of uncertainty. It was terrifying, sure, but it was also empowering. Emily pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages she'd received over the past few days. Mia had been texting her non-stop, checking in on her, offering support. It was time to let Mia know what had happened. "It's done, he's gone, but I still don't know what to do next." Mia's reply came almost instantly. "I'm coming over, we'll figure it out together." Emily dropped her phone on the couch and walked over to the window. The city was still alive, people going about their lives, oblivious to the storm inside her. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was drowning in that storm. She was standing tall in the center of it. Within an hour, Mia arrived. She looked at Emily with a mixture of concern and understanding, and Emily could tell she was trying to gauge the emotional landscape of the room. Without saying a word, Mia crossed the room and pulled Emily into a tight hug. It was comforting, but there was also a heaviness in the air, the weight of the decisions that had to be made. "Are you okay?" Mia asked, pulling back and looking into Emily's eyes. Emily let out a shaky breath. "I don't know, I'm okay, but it feels like everything's falling apart. I don't even know where to start picking up the pieces." Mia sat down beside her, wrapping her arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out, step by step." For the next few hours, they talked. Emily explained everything. The tracking, the confrontation, the moment she realized that Darren was never going to be the man she thought he was. Mia listened without judgment, offering only the support and understanding that Emily needed. The anger that had been building in Emily slowly started to dissipate as she allowed herself to process the emotions, and though there was a sense of finality in the air, there was also a feeling of hope. Emily wasn't sure where the future would take her, but she knew she was done being a victim. As the night wore on, they came up with a plan. Emily would start by taking control of her life, focusing on her career, her own personal growth. She'd let Darren go, but she wouldn't let him define her anymore. It wasn't just about moving on from him, it was about moving on for herself, reclaiming her independence. But before any of that could happen, Emily knew there was one more thing she had to do. She had to take a final step to confront Darren's affair. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly, but it was about making sure he knew the full weight of the consequences. It was about showing him that his actions had real-life ramifications. Emily reached for her phone again, her mind made up. She pulled up Darren's number, her finger hovering over the call button. But before she could press it, a text notification appeared on the screen. It was from Darren. "Please, let's talk. I don't want to lose you." The words felt empty now. How could he possibly think that, after everything that had happened, they could just pick up where they left off? She stared at the text for a long moment, her thumb still hovering over her screen. She had the power now, the control. She wasn't going to let him make her feel guilty. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her emotions again. Without replying, she set the phone down and stood up. This was her moment, the last part of the puzzle. It was time to take control. The next morning, Emily woke with a heavy heart. The city outside was bustling, Yet inside her apartment, everything felt still. She hadn't slept well, and the constant replay of Darren's face, the words he said, and the ones he didn't say, kept turning over and over in her mind. The silence in her apartment seemed to mock her. It wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about the realization that everything she thought she knew about their relationship had been shattered in the span of one conversation. As she made coffee, her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up without thinking, hoping it wasn't Darren, but it was another message from him. "I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We have to talk, Emily." Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had already told him everything she needed to say. What more could he offer that could undo the damage he had done? Nothing. She deleted the message without replying, a small but powerful act of defiance. The hurt was still there, but it was beginning to feel less raw. She couldn't keep rehashing the past. She needed to focus on herself. Mia had left early that morning, after spending most of the night comforting her, offering practical advice on how to move forward. "Don't do anything hasty, Em," Mia had told her. "Take time. Think this through. You're not just reacting to the pain, you're deciding who you want to be moving forward." It was sound advice, but Emily knew that she was done waiting. She needed to take action now. She went about her morning routine with a new sense of purpose. Her career, her friendships, and her own well-being had always been overshadowed by Darren's career, by his needs. But now, it was her time to take control. She was no longer just the wife, the partner. She was herself, and she was going to make sure no one ever took that from her again. At 11 a.m., Emily was sitting at her desk, glancing over a presentation for an upcoming business meeting, when her phone rang. It was Darren. The screen lit up, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it. But then she thought, "No, I'm done letting him control the narrative. This time, I answer." She swiped to answer the call, taking a deep breath as she held the phone to her ear. "Emily." Darren's voice was strained, his words slow, as if he were searching for the right ones to say. "Can we talk? I can't fix this over text, you know that." His tone had softened, but Emily wasn't swayed. He had been pleading for days now, trying to reframe the situation, trying to make it seem like he wasn't the one responsible. But she wasn't interested in his excuses anymore. "What is there left to say, Darren?" she replied, her voice steady, but cold. "I've given you every chance to explain yourself. I confronted you. You chose her over me. Over us. What else is there?" There was a long pause, and for a second, Emily almost felt like she could hear the regret in Darren's silence. I know I've hurt you, Em. But this doesn't have to be the end." She shook her head, though he couldn't see her. "You don't get to decide that, Darren. I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next. And I'm done." Darren's voice became more frantic now. "Please, just let me explain. Just give me one more chance." Emily clenched her jaw, holding back the tide of emotions that threatened to rise up. "You don't deserve another chance. You broke my trust, and you'll never get it back." She hung up before he could say anything more. The conversation had ended, and in many ways, so had their marriage. Emily could feel the finality of it settling over her, but she also felt a sense of relief. She had made her decision. Now it was time to start the process of moving on. Later that afternoon, she received an unexpected call from her lawyer. It was time to initiate the divorce proceedings. Emily hadn't expected to feel this calm about it, but as her lawyer explained the next steps, she realized that this was what she needed. There was no going back now. She was officially ending her marriage with Darren. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and decisions that Emily never thought she would have to make. As she sifted through old photos, gifts, and memories, she felt a mixture of grief and relief. She had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, trying to make everything work, and yet it had all fallen apart. But in those moments of quiet reflection, she also began to realize something. The woman she was becoming was stronger than the woman who had walked into the relationship with Darren. She had come to see how much she had compromised for him, how much of herself she had given up, no more. She was taking back control, and this time, she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Darren, define who she was. A week later, Darren reached out again. This time, Emily didn't pick up the phone. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table, taking a deep breath. Her phone buzzed with a message from him, and she couldn't help but read it. "I've hired a lawyer. We can still work through this, Emily. I'm not giving up on us." The words stung, but Emily didn't react. She simply placed her phone down and stared out the window, the city skyline stretching out before her. In that moment, she knew that she had made the right decision. This wasn't about getting revenge. This wasn't about trying to hurt Darren. This was about rebuilding herself, about finding out who she really was, without the weight of his lies dragging her down. That evening, she met up with Mia for dinner. It felt good to be surrounded by someone who understood, someone who hadn't judged her for her decisions. They sat in their favorite cafe, sipping wine and talking about everything but Darren. "So," Mia said after a while, leaning back in her chair, "what's next for you?" Emily smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm not sure yet, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited. I'm not just waiting for someone else to decide what happens next. I'm taking charge of my own life." Mia raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "To new beginnings," Emily echoed, clinking her glass against Mia's. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was moving forward, not just away from her past, but toward a future that was entirely her own. As the evening came to a close, Emily knew that the hardest part was over. The decision had been made. Darren was out of her life, and while the pain was still there, it was slowly being replaced by a sense of freedom. She was no longer a wife bound to someone who couldn't honor their vows. She was herself again, and that was worth more than anything else. But as she walked home in the cool night air, Emily felt the sharp sting of loss one more time. It wasn't the loss of Darren. It was the loss of the future she had once imagined. But even that pain was fading. She had made her choice. She was free, and from here on out, the only thing that mattered was what came next. Emily stood at the edge of the city park, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. It had been months since her life had turned upside down. Darren was no longer in her life, and though the journey hadn't been easy, Emily had finally come to terms with everything that had happened. In the weeks following the divorce, Emily had done exactly what she said she would. She took charge. She focused on her career, rediscovered old hobbies, and reconnected with friends she had neglected over the years. With every step she took away from the life she once had, she felt herself becoming stronger. Her confidence grew. Her sense of self, which had been buried under the weight of betrayal, was emerging again, louder and clearer than ever before. One day, as she was going through some old boxes, she found a journal she had kept back when she and Darren first got together. As she flipped through the pages, she saw how much she had dreamed for their future, the goals they had set together, the promises they made. It was bittersweet to see those dreams now, knowing they were broken. But Emily didn't linger on the sadness. Instead, she realized something important. Those dreams weren't the only ones that mattered. She still had dreams of her own, and those were the ones she was now going to chase. She had been living in the apartment for months now, and though it had been her home for years, it no longer felt like the place she wanted to stay forever. Emily was ready to make a fresh start, to find a new space that felt like her own, a place that wasn't haunted by the memories of her past life. It was a new chapter, and she was determined to make it count. As she walked through the park that day, Emily thought back to the conversations she'd had with Mia. They had spent hours talking about the lessons Emily had learned, about the mistakes they'd both made in their past relationships, and the importance of finding peace within herself. Before moving forward, Mia had been the friend Emily needed when everything felt like it was falling apart. The kind of friend who never judged her, no matter what. And that was something Emily took with her. She had learned to forgive herself. The hurt, the anger, and the fear of being alone all faded with time. She had learned that life didn't end just because a relationship did. In fact, it could be the beginning of something even better. Something more true to who she really was. As Emily stood there, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She didn't need Darren's approval, his love, or his validation. She had found herself again, and that was enough. She had her own life now, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Not Darren. Not anyone. The story of her marriage was over, But the story of Emily Bennett, the woman who had fought through the storm and come out the other side, was just beginning. The next day, Emily walked into her new office, her shoulders straight, her steps confident she'd been promoted to a new role at work. A position that had always felt out of reach. When Darren was in the picture, she had sacrificed so much for him, for their relationship. But now she was finally seeing the rewards of putting herself first. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to find a text from Mia. "How's the new place?" Emily smiled as she typed back, "Perfect, it's mine." For a moment, she thought about Darren and the life they once shared. She thought about the pain, the betrayal, the grief. But she didn't let it consume her. She had come through it all, stronger and wiser. She had taken back control, and now the future was hers to shape. As she sat in her office, ready to take on whatever came next, Emily reflected on everything she had learned. Love was important, yes, but so was self-love. No one else could define her happiness or her worth. She had been through the fire, but she had emerged stronger, unscathed by the burns. She wasn't the same woman she was before. She was better, clearer, and more determined than ever to live the life she deserved. That night, Emily went out to dinner with Mia. They sat at a small table by the window, sipping wine and talking about everything. About their careers, their lives, the men who came and went. The laughter was easy, the conversation light, but there was a sense of peace between them. Emily had finally let go of the past, and it was a relief. After dinner, Mia asked, "So, what's next for you?" Emily paused, her gaze drifting out the window to the twinkling city lights. "I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to focus on my career, on myself, and who knows? Maybe one day I'll find love again. But for now, I'm just enjoying where I'm at." Mia grinned. "That sounds perfect." Emily raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her smile radiant. "To new beginnings," Mia echoed, clinking her glass against Emily's. They both took a sip, and for the first time in months, Emily felt that she was exactly where she needed to be. She didn't need anyone to validate her anymore. She had come through the storm, and now she was standing tall in the sunlight. The journey wasn't easy, but it had shaped her into the person she was meant to be, and that person was ready to take on the world. And that's a wrap on today's story. I hope you enjoyed it and found it as empowering as I did. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And of course, subscribe to the channel to stay updated with all our latest content. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep moving forward, just like Emily.